Hello and good evening. We're just starting our live broadcast from beautiful downtown Luckett's, Virginia. And my name is Janice Courtcamp. This is my husband, Sid. I know a lot of people haven't joined in yet, and you'll join in over the course of the time. But this video will be available for later viewing as well. Hello, Mark. Good to see you. Happy Sunday. One of the things that I did last video, the first episode, was I introduced the arak, the national drink, alcoholic drink of Syria that's so popular there. And this week I wanted to introduce people to Syrian coffee and how much a part of the culture that is. And to do that first, I wanted to introduce my husband, Sid, here. And he's going to tell you a little bit about our experience with Syrian coffee, our first experience.
Well, hello. 4 years ago, before Jan had taken a trip to Syria, your first trip is to Allentown, Pennsylvania. We got invited up. We're being hosted. We're there for a couple of days. And at one point, would you like coffee? Yes, we'd like coffee. So that takes a time and the coffee comes. And in the time that is passing, at some point, Jan compliments the coffee service. Well, when that wrapped up and we're leaving, our hostess came out and presented to us a full coffee service. And you only have one choice. Thank you very much. It's beautiful. We've brought it home. We've used it many times. And Jan, may I make you a cup of Syrian coffee?
Yes, please, Sid. Thank you very much.
I will go and take our little Syrian coffee cooker, put coffee in it, put water in it, bring it to a boil, take it off. Back to a boil, take it off. Back to a boil, take it off. Wait the right period of time, wrap the side 3 times, pour some in a cup.
He's our official coffee maker here. Thanks, honey. Okay, so this week, I basically introduced myself last week, so I'm not going to do that again. And welcome, everybody. I see a lot of people online. So we're just going to go right into things. My name is Janice Courtcamp, though, and I have made 6 trips to Syria over the course of the last 2.5 years, starting in May 2016. And I've spent about the last 6 years, all day, every day, researching both the conflict and the country. And I've really fallen in love with Syria as a country. And so I wanted to share my experiences of traveling there. There are so many people that are interested and curious to learn more about Syria, and I love that. And this really helps me too, because it records these memories that are very precious to me. And so whether there's one person on or 1,000, I think I'm going to keep this up so that I can get these recorded and be able to access them again. So thank you all for joining me. I wanted to share 2 stories today. We only have a half an hour. I think I'll go back to doing an hour-long segment because I feel like I'm a little rushed. But the first experience I wanted to share with you was my very first night in Damascus. And I had flown into Damascus airport from Kuwait City. Fabulous flight on sham wings. And they took me under their wing, literally, and made sure that I had a great flight. And the people at the airport were very gracious to me. And that evening, my friends and I went to the old city of Damascus, and it just so happened to be Friday evening, and it was Good Friday for the Eastern Orthodox Church. And when we got to Old Damascus, we ended up on the street called Straight, which is very famous in the Bible. It's where the Apostle Paul became a Christian. And, you know, I'm there. It was basically dusk. The air was, the sky was pink. There were flocks of birds flying. And the air was filled with the sound of church bells, and there was a choir that I could hear singing. Again, we were on the street called Straight, on a street that has been a street for thousands of years. Of course, when the Apostle Paul was walking that street, it was 2 stories down from the level that I was at. But you can feel the history in the stones there of old Damascus. It's the oldest continuously inhabited capital city in the world. And that's in the air. You can just feel it, as I said. So that's how we started the evening in Old Damascus. We went from there to a wonderful cafe that I love and had a fabulous Syrian meal. And then we ended up in another cafe, and there was live music playing that night. And so you had a traditional Syrian oud player and a keyboardist, a guy with a beautiful voice playing the oud. And he was singing songs, mostly love songs. The place was packed. And I want to tell you, these places in Old Damascus are so gorgeous. There is an aesthetic in Syria that, for me, is one of the most beautiful in the world. The stonework, the woodwork, the carvings, everything is, there's ornateness to it, but it's never over the top. It's always so classy. And honestly, when I'm in those places, in those beautiful homes or the cafes, the hotels in Old Damascus, I feel like I'm a more civilized human being. It just has that effect on me. But anyway, we went into this cafe and it was filled, like I said, people, all kinds of different people. You could tell there were Muslims there and Christians, and there's, just all the different groups of Syria in there enjoying themselves that evening. Just about everybody's smoking shisha, which we call the hookah here, which is a water pipe, and there's a sweet tobacco that's in it, and you're smoking a water vapor. It's delicious. The air was filled with the water vapor and the smoke of people's cigarettes, so it had kind of that hazy appearance on it. And, I'm sitting there having a cocktail, and some people are drinking alcohol, some are drinking tea or coffee, as they usually do. And, I had to just kind of stop and realize that I was actually there after 4 years of researching the country and trying to get to know it and to actually be there. And I'm surrounded by these people, happy people that are enjoying their evening, even though I know that every one of them had lost a loved one or a good friend in the war, who had been going through times of fear themselves. Damascus was under constant attack by these so-called rebels that, would fire mortars and rockets and use car bombs and suicide bombs against the civilians there on a constant basis. So they were in a lot of danger themselves, and yet they were going about their lives. And here they were enjoying themselves in this cafe, getting a little teary-eyed over some of the love songs that my friend was translating for me. And every once in a while, there would be a patriotic song. And, all of a sudden, people would be singing about Syria and Bashar and the army, and they were just getting fired up. And I was, of course, cheering that on. I knew a few of those songs, actually. I'd heard them on YouTube. And the crowd kind of saw me, going, yay, Syria. And, they kind of adopted me in a way, and people were asking me to dance, and which was really embarrassing because Syrians can dance and I can't. But, that you just are in the spirit of the moment. And it was it was like being in the old classic film Casablanca, actually, very similar to that. And the difference was that it was all real. Those weren't actors. The stones are real stones. The wood is real wood. And the people are real human beings that had lived at that time through years of war already and had been suffering for years. And yet they were coming over and welcoming me and just making me feel at home there. And I think I realized that night that whatever happened in the trip, that night was worth the years of research and what it took to actually get into the country. And whatever else happened would be kind of gravy, because that one night was so magical. And of course, that was just the start of many adventures. And I wanted to share about another adventure on that same trip, and that was going to Lattakia in 2016. And as I share these stories in these different episodes, they're going to be kind of random. It's just kind of what I feel like sharing at that night. But this one, for some reason, just kept coming up in my mind. And so we went to Lattakia, my friend and I, who was acting as my guide and translator. And, you talk about Syrian hospitality. That was one of the times that I did receive a free hotel room like I described last trip. And what a hotel room. I mean, they were so excited to have a tourist come again to Syria that they actually ended up giving me a few nights stay in this beautiful, gorgeous seaside resort called the Lamira Resort Hotel with a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. And, talk about feeling civilized. I would never stay in such a place. I don't have the budget to stay in such a place usually. So that was a great gift. And I think I have coffee ready now. So excuse me for just a second. Thank you, honey.
It's going to cost you.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, dear. So I was in Lattakia, and the first stop was to meet the governor. And as I've described before, in Syria, you have states, which are called governments. You have, I think there's 14. Each government has a capital city, and the capital city and the government have the same name. So you have Lattakia City and Lattakia Government. You have Aleppo City and the Aleppo Government. So we were in Lattakia City, and I was meeting the governor of the city and the government. And he was wonderful. He was so gracious, and we spent about an hour and a half together. And I could tell that he was pretty excited to have an American visit that was pretty up to speed on the situation. He was giving me a lot of great information. He spent about an hour telling me about the war and what had been going on in Lattakia there. And he was asking me questions. And by the end of our interview time, we had a pretty good bond. And he said, "What do you want to do here in Lattakia?" I said, "Well, I'd like to see an IDP center." IDP stands for internally displaced persons. So you call them refugees if they're out of the country, and IDPs if they're in the country. So I wanted to see one of those centers. I wanted to visit a hospital. The famous Tishreen Hospital is there, connected to the Tishreen University, which is huge. And to go to visit and pay my respects at the tomb of the late President Hafez al-Assad, and to visit a very special place called Wadi Maluk, which I'll talk about in a minute. And those wishes were all granted very enthusiastically. And so that was actually, Lattakia is one of the few times that I've actually had an entourage. So as I traveled around Lattakia on that trip, I had two people from the government with me, from the Ministry of Information. I had my friend and my translator, and there were several soldiers that were going along with us everywhere we went. And that was kind of trippy. I had never experienced that before. And we actually had a great time together. We were laughing and talking, and we went first to downtown Lattakia. Lattakia is a seaside city, large town, small city that's on the Mediterranean. There are beautiful beaches there. And I have to tell you, all around Syria, the people are really good looking. For the most part, the men are handsome and the women are gorgeous. And in Lattakia, it's even more so. I mean, you kind of walk around the streets there feeling like you're with models and actors and actresses. It's quite a place. And this is known as the Alawite homeland in Lattakia, especially the hills there in the countryside. But that's a misnomer because especially during the war and before the war, I mean, there are Christians there, many Sunnis, Druze, Kurds, etc. People don't understand that in Syria, you hear on the news, oh, that's the Alawite stronghold. Well, yeah, there may be a lot of Alawites there, but there are a lot of everybody else there as well. And that's the case of Lattakia, and particularly during the war, because they received a lot of the displaced people, particularly from Aleppo. And so we went to downtown Lattakia, and the guy who was of the Ministry of Information, who was is an Alawite, and we're going downtown, and he shows me this street where a lot of the people from Aleppo had started businesses. And he said, it's a good thing these people came from Aleppo. Many of them are Sunni, because they're such hardworking people, and they've taught us, kind of lazy beach town people how to really work. And, I just love that even with that really hard part of the war and the situation, that he was finding something positive about it. We went from there to the IDP center. Now in Syria, unlike the refugees that went outside of Syria that the UN put in tents, etc., they're mucking around in mud and they're freezing in the winter and so hot in the summer. Excuse me, I have to let the dog out. Sorry about that. So in Syria, the government puts people up who have been displaced from their homes in structures, and they're in buildings, they're in schools, they're in, renovated factories or what have you, but they're in places with walls and roofs and doors and things like this. And they receive food and medical care and education for the children. So people are well taken care of by the government in these centers. And the people from this center, this was very poignant because they had come from Idlib. And Idlib, you'll hear in the news quite a bit now. This is the last stronghold of terrorist groups in Syria. It's in the northwestern quadrant of Syria, and it borders Lattakia on one side and Aleppo province on the other side. And it's controlled by Al-Qaeda and several other terrorist groups, but they all share the same ideology. And when those groups had come into Idlib, they set about rampaging through the countryside of Idlib and the city, and they drove out the religious minorities that live there. So oftentimes they drove them out, or they executed them or massacred villages, etc., particularly the Alawite and the Shiite villages. They would mark the homes of Christians and force those families out of their homes so that fighters could take them over. Right now, there are about 50,000, maybe 70,000 of these fighters that control Idlib right now. And this is why the Syrian government, the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, etc., are intent on defeating these terrorist groups in Idlib, because it's basically an Al-Qaeda caliphate in the shoulder of Syria. And again, it's right between Lattakia and Aleppo. The families that I met with, they were mostly women and children. And, many of these children had actually seen their fathers butchered by these terrorist groups. And it was really, one of the little guys didn't really speak. He was very shy at first, and he was kind of following me around as I was touring the building. And in the end, he came up close to me, and I took a picture with him and the rest of the kids of the center. That is one that you've seen a lot on my page because I treasure that one. Next, we went to the hospital, the Tishreen Hospital in Lattakia. This is a very modern, beautiful hospital. These doctors and nurses have been working, just 2 and 3 shifts at a time and more. They've had to handle everything from people getting blown to bits by suicide bombers and car bombs to just all kinds of things that they've had to deal with there. The staff was very impressive. So that was a great visit. And then I got to go to, as I said, the tomb of the late President Hafez al-Assad. Now in the West, he's very controversial, and even over there, but for the most part, the Syrian people consider him the father of modern Syria. And I've studied him to some extent, and really have come to see him as a person of remarkable shrewdness and strength and a true vision for his country. And, it's a tough neighborhood, and people are tough there, and there were tough decisions and policies made. It's not for me to really critique or anything. That's for Syrians to do. But I did want to pay my respects, and I got to the mausoleum. Beautiful, again, very classy, peaceful place. It was a real honor to get to go. And I stood at the graveside there and just, I prayed. I prayed for Syria. I prayed if God would give me a little bit of Hafez's strength and shrewdness so that I could understand better the situation. And it's really a profound moment for me, and I'm very thankful that I was able to go there. So after that, my entourage and I, in 2 vehicles, we drove out to the countryside of Lattakia. And this is a place called Wadi Maluk, which, it's in the hills. And I'll put up pictures later after the talk is finished. Gorgeous place. It looks like an oasis, but it's, it's not in the middle of the desert. It's in these beautiful green, fertile hills. Very beautiful, peaceful place. I keep saying the same thing. We were there at an unusual time. There was no one else there. It's a restaurant. And I told my friend I'd like to take all these guys to lunch. So we had the place to ourselves, and we had arak, we had beer, we had coffee, we had appetizers, we had shisha going. We had a full course. I mean, that table, I wanted to just feed those soldiers until they could not eat anymore, because those guys had been in the army since before the war started. Each of them had seen it all and had been through it all. And I really appreciated getting the time with them and wanted to show my appreciation. And so, because of the difference in the exchange rate, so $1 at that time was about 500 Syrian pounds. That whole meal for, I think it was 8 people total, 7 or 8 people, came to $40, 40 US dollars. And it was just a privilege to share that with them. The stories that they were sharing about the battles that they were in were amazing. And one thing that I noticed, my friend, I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a bee literally just zoomed in on him and stung him in his eye. And he's a big, strong guy, but you could tell it really was painful. And here I am, I'm the only woman of the crew, and, the mom. You'd think that I would rush in to try to take care of this this wound. But no, it was these soldiers, these veteran soldiers, and they were just so gentle and caring. And they got the restaurant owner to give us some raw garlic, and they put garlic on it to neutralize the sting. And it made me realize how these guys take care of each other, when they're during the war. And I was really touched by that, because in Lattakia, Lattakia, the city has not suffered very much damage. Really, there's virtually no damage there. But in the city and all around that area, a lot of those guys are in the army. And so when I was up early in the morning, out on the balcony having my coffee, every morning I'd hear gunfire. That wasn't gunfire of fighting. That was soldiers who had heard of a martyr, one of the soldiers dying in battle, and they would shoot the guns off. It's too bad, because that's dangerous in itself. But what I'm saying is, all around Syria, you see the pictures of the martyrs that have fallen. Whole streets lined with pictures of sons and fathers and husbands who have died defending their country. In Lattakia, in the countryside, in the summer of 2013, one of the Free Syrian Army, fighting alongside with Al-Qaeda, went on what's called now the rampage through Lattakia. And they literally targeted one village after another for extinction. They killed all the men, and they took thousands and thousands of women and children captives. And, the Free Syrian Army is one of the groups that's directly supported, had been directly supported by the United States of America and promoted as these great freedom fighters and moderate rebels. So Lattakia has seen its fair share. And it was, the people there were, there was kind of a palpable sadness of the people walking around the streets and stuff. And here you have this beautiful beach town. And like I said before, the girls wear bikinis on the beaches, people drink beers and margaritas on the beaches, and they've done that throughout much of the war. And that tourism is really starting to come back to Lattakia. But this is what you see all over Syria, is this, you have this kind of the best and the worst. When I was talking about that cafe in Damascus, where it was like being in the movie Casablanca, but how real all of it is, you have just that incredible, intense contrast between what Syrians want their lives to be and what it's been over the past 8 years. And it's been a living nightmare for 8 years. But now, throughout much of Syria, people are safe again. It's under the control of the government again. It's stable again. People are starting to rebuild. And what I love seeing especially is that they're really starting to rebuild their futures and their dreams. And I just want to see more and more of this in Syria. So those are my few little stories for this evening. And I want to thank you all for joining. I'm going to just briefly look here and see if there are any questions from people. I don't see any specific questions. But just a lot of support and hellos and highs, and thank you for that. So I'll be back next week. I'm going to go back actually to an hour, because I feel like I'm too rushed with this and not really able to respond to questions and comments. And I really hope you join me, because I love having you with me on these live videos. I love hearing from you, and I love sharing about Syria. So not Eric this time, but coffee Syrian style in a cup given us by Syrian friends in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Cheers to you all. Cheers to you, Syria. It was 0-0 on the football match today. So, we'll take that, and good luck for the next game. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.